Welcome, everybody. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty, which is to be expected when you do everything virtually. Staff is having difficulty loading their PowerPoints right now. So I think we can start the meeting, and when we get to the time where we need PowerPoints, we'll figure out what to do if we haven't fixed our problem. So welcome to a meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm David Muller, representing Secretary Pollock here. Consistent with Governor Patrick's orders over COVID-19, we are having this meeting virtually. Therefore, we'll be taking roll call votes if we have any votes. If you want to speak, please use the raise your hand function and we will call on you. If you have any need for a assistive technology, you should contact Rosine Foley, Rosine, unmute yourself so you can give your email and your phone number because I don't have it memorized.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Roisin. You can email me at rfoley@ctps.org or call me at 857-702-3704.
Thanks, Rosine. All right, so first item on the agenda, as always, is introductions. I've already introduced myself. I'm David Muller, representing Secretary Pollock here. So Jonathan, call the roll, please.
Yes, sir. MassDOT Chair.
Here.
David Moeller. Okay. MassDOT 2. Is John Bouchard on? Don't see him.
And all MPO members, please raise your hand using the raise hand function so we can find you easier. Thanks.
John Bouchard is here.
Thank you, John. I just see John Romano. I just let him into the room, into the meeting. So MassDOT Highway.
Doesn't look like John has audio quite.
Okay. I'll move on to MBTA.
Samantha Silverberg, MBTA here.
Thank you. Massport.
Good morning. This is Laura Gilmore with the Massachusetts Port Authority.
Thank you. MAPC.
Good morning, Eric Barrasso with MAPC.
Thank you. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board.
Thank you. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins, Advisory Council here.
Thank you. City of Boston BTD.
Tom Katz, the City of Boston, representing Mayor Martin Walsh, present.
Thank you. City of Boston BPDA.
Hi, Jim Fitzgerald with BPDA, representing Mayor Walsh, City of Boston.
Great, thank you. At-large City of Everett.
I don't see Jay.
Okay. At-large City of Newton.
David Kozis, at-large city, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
Thank you. At-large Town of Arlington.
Yep. Daniel Amstutz, Town of Arlington, MPO member, representing Select Board Chair John Hurd and MPO area towns.
Great. Thank you. At-large Town of Lexington.
Sheila Page, representing at-large community of Lexington and the MPO communities, and Select Board Chair Douglas Sente.
Great, thank you. Intercore Somerville.
City of Somerville, Tom Bent, representing Mayor Joseph Curtatone in the Intercore.
Thank you. Magic Acton.
I don't see Austin.
Okay. Metro West Framingham.
Thatcher Keyser, representing Mayor Spicer, Framingham, present.
Thank you. North Shore Beverly. Okay, not seeing Darlene. North Suburban Woburn.
Good morning, Tina Cassidy, representing Woburn Mayor Scott Galvin and the North Suburban Planning Council.
Thank you. South Shore Rockland. Nope. Okay. Swap Medway. Okay. And Trick Norwood NRC.
Morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood, representing Trick subregion.
Okay, and I'll check our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Ken Miller, Federal Highway.
Thank you. Federal Transit Administration. Okay, and I think John Romano is on now. Just want to make sure that he's called on.
John Romano's here.
Thank you. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Quorum being present, we'll proceed with the meeting. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I don't have one, so the next item up is executive director's report. Tegan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to first give the board a heads up that we are moving through some of the interviews and focus groups for the CTPS strategic planning process. So you'll start to see emails likely from me first, and then perhaps from our consultants to schedule interviews or a focus group with you to get your input into this process. As you see those come through, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to talk with you about it. So then next, I'd like to give you a couple of outreach highlights. As I hope you are aware, we are in the midst of getting the feedback on the TIP criteria revisions, which we will talk about today. As of yesterday, we received 442 completed surveys. I hope there's even a few more since then. And it's open through August 24th, so I guess 4 more days. And we'll be doing a final push through our outreach to get additional surveys completed. So if you can help us at all with that, or if you haven't filled out the survey, you're welcome to do so. And please help us get as much input as we can. A couple of other ways we've been talking about these revisions with folks and getting feedback are through meetings. We had a meeting recently with Conservation Law Foundation and Green Roots, where we discussed the criteria changes and more specifically and sort of in more depth on how the MPO is integrating equity into each of the goal areas. And then we also will hold a meeting on August 27th with Transit Matters at their advisory council meeting. Staff will present and discuss the revisions and get some feedback on the changes. So that's it with the TIP criteria revisions. We will be talking about, again, the scoring a bit today. We have another meeting coming up on August 25th in the evening at 5:30, which is going to be the 4th meeting of the Disparate Impact Disproportionate Burden Stakeholder Group. Some board members have been involved. This was the group that worked to draft a policy that sets thresholds that are used to address whether the whole set of projects embodied in the LRTP have a disproportionate impact on minority and low-income populations. So it's one of our tools in the toolbox to talk about equity, but I want to emphasize that it is different than the TIP criteria, and it's an important tool, but it is one of many. But the whole point is that this is one way in which you can continue to assess equity in your planning and project selection. So at that 4th meeting, we're actually going to be talking with the stakeholders about recommendations for further refining the threshold and the policy itself, and ask for feedback. So we can report back to the board on that conversation. That said, today we have less things than usual on our agenda, which is great, but we'll spend some time on a couple of these topics. First, we'll quickly have a scope of work for you to hopefully approve for the MBTA fiscal year 2021 Title VI monitoring. And then we will spend a good chunk of time today talking about that major infrastructure definition in the LRTP that we've discussed numerous times in the past. Hopefully you saw that we posted a pretty thorough document to sort of describe what you've discussed to date, when and how decisions have been made to date, and to give you background on what we'd like to suggest that you consider today. And we'd really like to try to get to a conclusive conversation about how you want to adjust the major infrastructure definition now in advance of the next LRTP process when we can talk about it again. And then of course, we'll talk about the TIP criteria scoring and the framework for that scoring. And it builds on all these conversations we've been having. When we get to the next meeting, the next MPO meeting in a few weeks, we'll actually talk about the first round of actually testing those scoring results and get member feedback on what that means when you actually apply it to projects. And then I think that's going to be the main item for the next meeting, in addition to a couple of other scopes of work that are non-MPO funded that will be coming to your attention. And with that, Mr. Chair, I think I've completed my overview. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions from the members for Tegan? If so, raise your hand using the raise hand function. Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is public comment. If there's anyone from the public who would like to make a comment at this time, please raise your hand. Seeing none, if you have a comment during the meeting, please raise your hand and we will call on you. Next item on the agenda is committee chairs reports. Are there any? Nope. Next up is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so we had a little meet and greet at our last meeting. Normally we take August off, but we didn't this year in order to just have a session for members to get to know each other a little better and get a sense of what to plan for the agenda. It was a small turnout, but it's August. But the folks that did turn out, it was a really good meeting. Our next meeting is going to be on the 9th of September, and it's not clear to me what the agenda is at this point. We may very well be meeting with the consultant and to talk about the strategic plan for CTPS. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Any questions for Lynn? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is the meeting minutes of June 25th. Can I get a motion and a second to put them on the table, please? And raise your hand to make the motion and please state your name for the record. Eric Barassa.
This is Eric Barassa, and I'll make a motion to put the to approve the minutes.
Tina Cassidy.
Good morning, this is Tina Cassidy, and I would second that motion.
Thank you. Motion being made and seconded. Are there any comments, questions, suggestions, or changes? Eric, your hand is still up. Do you have a comment or did you? Okay, there you go. Any other comments, questions, suggestions? Seeing none, Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Samantha Silverberg,
Yes.
Laura Gilmore,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Sorry.
I think he said yes, but could you repeat that, Brian?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Just caught the tail end of that. Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis,
Yes, Tom Kadzis.
thank you. Jim Fitzgerald,
Yeah, well, this is
Yeah.
good. And the good news is you've got.
I think you got to me.
yeah, okay. Jim, I think you said yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Sheila Page,
Yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Thatcher Keyser,
Yes.
Tina Cassidy, I think I heard yes.
Yes, you did.
Thank you. Thank you. And Tom O'Rourke.
Looks like Tom O'Rourke dropped out of the meeting.
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, no,
whoop, there
my
he is.
apologies.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. The next item on the agenda is the action item for the work scope for the MBTA fiscal year 2021 Title VI monitoring. Bradley Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present a work scope for MBTA 2021 Title VI program monitoring. CTPS has been assisting the MBTA with their Title VI monitoring work for many years, and this work scope represents a continuation of that work. The schedule for this project is 12 months. The budget is $73,000, and the MBTA will pay for this work. Every 3 years, the MBTA is required to submit a report to the Federal Transit Administration detailing the MBTA's efforts to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The purpose of the Title VI report is to ensure that the MBTA provides a comparable level and quality of transportation services to all customers without regard to race, color, or national origin. CTPS completed the MBTA's most recent triennial Title VI report earlier this year, and so the next one will be due in the year 2023. And then in the interim years, in which there is not a triennial report, FDA requires the MBTA complete annual service monitoring and internal reporting to identify and address any potential disparate impacts early and to ensure ongoing compliance with Title VI. And so the work scope before you right now is for the interim year service monitoring for 2021. For this work, CTPS will compile and analyze 10 categories of MBTA service data, such as vehicle load, on-time performance, and distribution of transit amenities. And the work will cover data from the modes of bus, heavy and light rail, and commuter rail. The final product of this work will be a technical memorandum that will be submitted to the MBTA with the results of the data analysis. Again, CTPS has been assisting the MBTA with their Title VI monitoring work for many years, and this work scope represents a continuation of that work. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, but otherwise, I would like to request that the board please vote to approve this scope. Thank you.
Thank you, Bradley. Any questions for Bradley from the members? If so, please raise your hand. Leonard Diggins, sorry. All right, now I will take a motion in a second to approve the work scope as presented. Leonard Diggins.
Sorry about that. I was just trying to get my hand up to approve the motion to make the motion to approve the work scope.
Thank you. Eric Barassa.
I second that motion.
Motion having been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Samantha Silverberg,
Yes.
Laura Gilmore,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis,
Tom Katz's yes, Brian.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Sheila Page,
Yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton,
I think he said yes, Tom. Okay. Thatcher Keyser,
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is also an action item, and it's the major infrastructure definition. And again,
Good morning, everybody. I just want to check to make sure I can advance the slides.
Should be good, Ann.
Why does this do this to me every time?
I can control them if you'd like.
Okay, let me just, okay, I guess I'll have to have you do that. So, okay. Good morning, everybody. Today, I'm back today to continue our discussion on the definition of the MPO's major infrastructure program. So our discussions on this definition began last year and continued into the summer with dialogue on whether the program should have a cost threshold and what type of project should be considered as major infrastructure. So to help guide this discussion today, staff put together a memorandum which was posted on the meeting calendar website. It summarizes the items that have been discussed in the MPO meetings to date, gives you a history on the major infrastructure program over the years, provides information on the federal requirements behind past major infrastructure program definitions, and then it provides staff recommendations on the definition of the program and project scoring for major infrastructure projects. So after my presentation and board discussion, staff is requesting the MPO to adopt a set of definitions and policies for this program. Next slide, please. So this is going to be a bunch of clicks, Matt. At the last meeting, there was some discussion on the definitions of all of the MPO's investment programs. So the memo includes a description of our 6 programs along with the MPO's funding goals for each program. So this summary is shown in table 1 of the memorandum. And so the 6 programs are complete streets with a 45% funding goal, intersection improvements with a 13% funding goal, bicycle network and pedestrian connections with a 5% funding goal, community connections with a 2% funding goal, transit modernization with a 5% funding goal, and major infrastructure with a funding goal of no more than 30% of the MPO target funds. You can click one more time. And then again, table 1 shows more details. So some of the other key points made by board members from our previous discussions include that there should be some cost threshold to retain a level of scrutiny for projects that are expensive, with most members supporting a cost threshold of $50 million. The major infrastructure definition should capture projects that have a regional impact, such as an interchange improvement or significant transit extension. There should be some way of accounting for projects that do not change capacity, but do have an impact on a wide range of the public. The MPO should or could identify these projects by the project roadway type or vehicle miles traveled on that roadway. And then another key point to keep in mind is that when the MPO adopted the Destination 2040 LRTP, the MPO reaffirmed its policy of continuing an operations and management approach to programming, giving priority to low-cost, non-major infrastructure projects. So what I'd like to do is summarize the information and the staff recommendations that are in the memorandum, then open it up to discussion and adoption of the major infrastructure program definitions, and then possibly additional major infrastructure program policies if we have time. Next slide, please. So with the 6 MPO investment programs as background, I'd like to go through the evolution of the major infrastructure program. Historically, the MPO has identified major infrastructure projects based on cost or whether they change the capacity of the transportation network. So the current definition is any project that changes the capacity of the transportation network or costs over $20 million. And it is the policy of the MPO to list all major infrastructure projects in the LRTP. Next slide, please. So for capacity changes to the network, the MPO chose to define major infrastructure projects as those projects that change the capacity of the transportation network that can be included in the travel demand model. So this was based on federal requirements related to the air quality conformity determination regulation for the long-range plan. Because of its air quality designation, the MPO was required to perform conformity determinations and include all regionally significant projects as part of that analysis. So Federal Highway defined a regionally significant project as a transportation project that is on a facility that serves regional transportation needs, such as access to and from the area outside of the MPO region, access to major activity centers in the region, to major planned developments, such as new retail malls and sport complexes, and to transportation terminals. So these projects would be included in the modeling of an MPO's transportation network, including at a minimum all principal arterial highways and all fixed guideway transit facilities that offer an alternative to regional highway travel. So currently the MPO's travel, sorry.
Nope, this is my fault. My apologies, folks. Have this back in just a moment.
Okay, so I'll just finish this slide up. So currently the MPO's travel demand model includes all interstate highways, arterials, and collector roadways. Therefore, the current definition included all projects that change the capacity, such as adding or reducing travel lanes, as well as all new fixed guideway transit service. So these projects were all listed in the long-range transportation plan. So next slide.
Sorry about this.
Okay. Great, thank you. So for cost thresholds, FHWA issued guidance which included cost thresholds for projects that were required to be listed in the past LRTPs. So this guidance varied over time. In 2008, for Journey to 2030, all projects over $10 million were required to be included in the plan. In 2016, for Charting Progress to 2040, all projects over $20 million were required to be included in the plan. However, for our most recent plan, Destination 2040, there were no cost threshold requirements. Next slide, please. So with this history in mind, there are several themes that the MPO can consider for the major infrastructure program. First, cost thresholds may provide a way for the MPO to identify projects that merit further scrutiny. Second, the transportation projects may not need to add or remove capacity to have regional impacts, depending on the project's location and other characteristics. And conversely, a project may add or remove capacity, but not always have regional impacts. Last, the major infrastructure definitions for projects that focus on federal requirements for projects that must be included in the plan may not meet the needs of the MPO as it decides how to allocate its limited funds across the transportation projects and programs. Next slide, please. So looking back through the historic definitions and guidance and our MPO discussions, the MPO can consider not only capacity and cost in defining major infrastructure projects, but also roadway functional classification, environmental assessment or environmental impact statement requirements for projects to be listed in the plan, projects requiring specific levels of federal or state approval or oversight requirements for projects listed in the plan, projects that cross MPO boundaries, projects that will be funded wholly or in part through specific federal discretionary grant programs, projects that serve specific destinations within the regions, and other project characteristics such as whether the project includes an interchange. So MPO staff considered these items and in the case of roadways concluded that functional classification of roadways was the best characteristic to determine if a project is affecting regional travel. We will still continue to list projects in the plan that require federal approval or oversight, but they don't have to be part of the definition of the MPO's major infrastructure program. Next slide, please. Again, Matt, this is a couple clicks. So this slide shows the FHWA's functional classification of roadways. Next slide, next. Interstate highways are the highest classification of arterials and are designed and constructed with mobility and long distance travel in mind. Access to these roadways is through entrance and exit ramps. Principal arterial freeways or expressways include express highways built to interstate standards that are not designated as part of the interstate system, and access to these roadways is also provided through entrance and exit ramps. Principal arterials' other classifications serve major centers of metropolitan areas and provide a high degree of mobility with abutting land uses served directly. And access for these roadways include driveways to specific parcels and at-grade intersections with other roadways. However, some of these roadways do have fully or partially controlled access, which includes entrance and exit ramps or side roads that intersect the road at grade instead of ramps. Then the lower level classes of roadways include minor arterials, which provide service for trips of moderate length, serve geographic areas that are smaller than the higher arterial counterparts, and offer connectivity to the higher arterial system. They interconnect and augment the higher arterial system, provide intra-community continuity, and may carry local bus routes. Collector roadways serve a critical role in the roadway network by gathering traffic from local roads and funneling them into the arterial network. And then local roads account for the largest percentage of all roadways in terms of mileage, but are not intended for use in long distance travel. Bus routes generally do not run on local roads and are often designed to discourage through traffic. Next slide, please. So with the functional classification definitions in mind, I'd like to present the staff recommendations for the major infrastructure program definition. When developing recommendations, staff's goal was to suggest clear definitions that would help define the major infrastructure investment program in relation to other investment programs to develop an approach that addresses both federal and state requirements and supports scrutiny of projects with higher costs and or potential for regional impacts. So these would ideally simplify the MPO's classification and consideration of projects when making funding decisions, and it would provide more clarity for the project proponents on how their projects will be evaluated. Staff also considered how these definitions may affect administrative work resulting from amendments to both the LRTP and TIP documents when project costs change. Also keep in mind that even though staff is presenting these recommendations on the major infrastructure program, the board always has the discretion to include a project in this program if it chooses to do so. And in these cases, the classification of a major infrastructure project should be done when the project is submitted to the MPO for consideration. And then this will allow MPO members and the project proponent to know at the beginning of the process if it meets the requirements of the major infrastructure program. So with that in mind, staff recommends that major infrastructure projects should be defined separately from projects that are considered regionally significant for air quality analysis and travel demand modeling purposes, or projects that must be listed in the long-range plan to meet federal or state requirements. These definitions may have overlapping elements, but the MPO can structure its major infrastructure definition in ways that will best help to identify projects with regional impacts or merit increased scrutiny, allocate its dollars across investment programs, and then focus on the types of projects it would like to prioritize for funding. The cost threshold amount for a project to be designated as major infrastructure would increase from 20 million to 50 million to allow the MPO to maintain a level of scrutiny for the higher cost projects, while creating a more distinct separation between the major infrastructure program and other investment programs and potentially reducing the need for LRTP amendments. Even if a project does not meet the $50 million threshold, it would be classified as a major infrastructure project if it makes capital improvements to roadways that are classified as interstate highways, principal arterial freeways and expressways, or principal arterial other that have fully or partially controlled access. So MPO staff suggests specifying these roadways to focus the major infrastructure program on facilities that are important to regional travel. These roadways do not only carry higher volumes of traffic, but they are also designed to move people from one part of the region to another, as opposed to within municipalities or smaller groups of municipalities. And also by focusing on the facility classification, the definition can accommodate a variety of project types. Even if a project does not meet the $50 million cost threshold, a transit project would be classified as a major infrastructure project if it creates new connections or extends the MPO's rail or fixed guideway rail and transit network or bus rapid transit network. And again, if a project can be added to the major infrastructure program at the MPO's discretion. Next slide, please. One more, click. So the proposed definitions are shown here on the slide. Major infrastructure projects on the roadway network include those that meet at least one of the following criteria. Capital projects that improve facilities that are important to regional travel, which include interstate highways, principal arterial freeways and expressways, or all sections of roadways classified as principal arterial other that have fully or partially controlled access, and projects that cost $50 million or more. One more, Matt. Major infrastructure projects on the transit network include those that meet at least one of the following criteria. Capital projects that add new connections to or extend the rail or fixed guideway transit network, or the bus rapid transit network, and projects that cost more than $50 million. Next slide, please. So these next two slides show the interstate highways, principal arterial freeways and expressways, and all sections of the roadways classified as principal arterial other that have fully or partially controlled access that would be included in the major infrastructure program. The maps are also included in the memo. So this first map shows the full region. Next slide, please. And then this zooms into the inner core so that you can see the roadways more clearly. To further illustrate how projects would be categorized, the memo includes a list of projects that are included in the Destination 2040 LRTP and the 21 to 25 TIP, along with selected list of projects included in the universe of projects from both documents. So tables 2 through 6 in the memo include the projects by roadway classification, investment category, cost, and status in the LRTP and TIP. And this information can be used in the discussions to determine the types of projects that should be considered as part of the major infrastructure program. So table 2 shows the projects in the LRTP and TIP that are on interstate highways. Table 3 are projects on principal arterial freeways or expressways. Table 4 are projects on principal arterial highways classified as other. And as noted in the classification, a number of the projects on the roadways in this category are fully or partially access controlled roadways. Table 5 shows projects on minor arterials, and then table 6 shows projects on collectors and local roadways. It should be noted again that we will continue to apply the definition of regionally significant projects while conducting any air quality analyses using the travel demand model to meet federal and state requirements. And these analyses will continue to include all projects that change the capacity of the transportation network, whether or not they are considered to be major infrastructure projects under this new definition. The MPO can also list any projects specified by federal and state agencies that have to be included in the LRTP without classifying them as major infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. So also included in the memorandum is a section that shows the impacts of changing the major infrastructure definitions. Table 7 in the memorandum shows how the definitions and descriptions of the MPO's 6 existing investment programs would change if the MPO adopts staff's proposed major infrastructure project definitions. Most of the changes would occur in the Complete Streets program, since the projects would no longer be classified based on whether they change the capacity of the roadway network, but would be classified based on roadway type. So for all other investment programs other than the Complete Streets program, the main criteria would be if the project costs more than $50 million. Any intersection, bicycle, pedestrian, or transit modernization project that costs over $50 million would be considered a major infrastructure project, although we probably won't have many of these types of projects. We also included the information in tables 2 through 6 showing how each project's current investment program would be affected using the new definitions. Again, most of these projects will move from the major infrastructure program to the complete streets program. There are some outliers with an example shown in table 5 with bridge replacement projects. The MPO does not currently have a bridge program, although these projects would include, they could include complete street elements. They could have a bike lane, sidewalk, or dedicated bus lane crossing the bridge. And if the project has a complete street element, it could be evaluated under the complete street project category. But if the project does not have any of these elements in the design, the MPO may choose to establish a bridge program in the next LRTP or to fund this project at its discretion, much like we did for the new Boston Street Bridge project in Woburn. Next slide, please. There would be some impacts on the MPO's funding goals if the major infrastructure program definition changes. Staff recalculated the funding percentages for each investment program for projects that are currently programmed in Destination 2040 and the 21 to 25 TIP. So this table, which is also table 8 in the memo, shows the investment program in the first column with its LRTP funding goal in column 2. Then it shows the actual percentages of program projects in the TIP and LRTP in federal fiscal years 20 to 24 and then 25 to 29 using the current major infrastructure definition and then the proposed major infrastructure definition. Again, you can see that all of the changes in the complete street program with the major infrastructure program percentages decreasing and the complete streets program increasing. So the new definition helps the MPO move closer to the funding goals that are established in Destination 2040 and is in line with the MPO's policy of continuing an operations and management approach to programming, giving priority to the low-cost, non-major infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. So I want to open it up to questions and discussions and hopefully vote on the definition of the major infrastructure program. And then if we have time, I'd like to present the staff recommendations on a scoring policy for major infrastructure projects. And that scoring information is included at the end of the posted memorandum. So Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Ann. Questions from the members? Please raise your hand. David Kozis.
Okay, thank you, Ann. I just wanted to clarify that any project that is either partially or fully has controlled access would now automatically be considered a major infrastructure project, regardless of the cost of the project or the scope of the project. I guess it could even be even a maintenance project. If that's the definition, it would automatically be a major infrastructure. And I guess that would be okay.
Well,
Unless
it's capital projects.
Say that again?
Capital projects.
Okay, so
not necessarily maintenance.
Okay, so not maintenance, but anything that is partially or fully, having controlled access. Seems okay unless it somehow would put a particular project at a disadvantage, I guess, in terms of being selected for funding, only because it's now required to be a major infrastructure project instead of, like a complete streets project. And I'm not sure if that would be possible, but can you think of a scenario where maybe we might select a project if it was a complete streets project, but we can't because it now has to be classified as a major infrastructure project?
Well, I guess for major, if it's over $50 million.
I guess I'm talking about smaller projects. Let's say it's a $500,000 project that's, on a ramp or something, or on somehow, has, this controlled access element to it.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that was one of the reasons that I tried to put together those tables 2 through 6. So looking at all of the projects that we have in the plan and then those projects in the universe that were applicable to this, to show you that most of the projects that we have fit into one of these categories. And when you look at the principal arterials other and look at those that have fully or partially controlled access, and that is table 4. All of the projects that do have the fully or partially controlled access are projects that are already considered major infrastructure in our plan. So like the Natick project is one of those projects. So, and then, and as I said, it's at the MPO's discretion. If these projects come in and you don't feel like these projects really merit to be major infrastructure, the MPO always has the discretion. And that's why I'm suggesting that once a project is submitted, we look at these, and as part of the process, we categorize each project in each investment program so that people know from the beginning if a project should be included, and if it really shouldn't be included, then it would fall into it and have the characteristics of another investment program. So.
Right. So I guess that's why I say it seems okay, because really in the end, it seems like we're never really boxed into anything. We always have the right to choose a project regardless of whatever the category happens to be.
Yes. It's always at your discretion.
Yeah.
But this way, we're trying to make this a clear definition so proponents, and another reason is because with the new TIP criteria, we're now doing it with, the criteria by investment program. So this gives proponents an idea of how their project is going to be evaluated. So it's important that at the beginning of the process, we assign it its investment program.
Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, so yeah, I think to Ann's point, in response to David, it's like this is guidance, and it is at our discretion what to do. And I often think back to Thatcher's question back in November, where he proposed, like, if we had a large, very expensive project, $100 million, that just did everything, would we not consider it, because the threshold made it a major infrastructure project, and now it ate up too much of the budget and we couldn't consider it. And so I think ultimately it comes down to what the project does, and we can talk about that more, and we certainly will talk about that more, I think, in an advisory council meeting. First off, or second, I want to just say the memo is superb. It was just so informative, so well written, and I can't thank you and Michelle enough for writing such a great document. And I did have a couple of just questions though that I maybe just missed, didn't understand completely. Do you have the memo handy, Ann?
I do. Right there.
So on page 2, and you mentioned this a couple other times, there's a sentence that says, "We review the status of my projects in the previous LRTPs to ensure that they are moving towards implementation." And then it says if there's no movement in design, construction, or schedule for implementation is not available, then should consider placing the project in a universe of projects for consideration in future LRTPs. So I would.
Can I interrupt you for a minute? That's the second part of my presentation.
Okay.
That's it. So we broke the presentation up so that we could talk about the definition, and then if there was time, or else we'd come back to another meeting, then we would talk about the second set. So this is like the definition discussion, and then there's the policy discussion after.
Okay. Thank you very much. No, it's appropriate to interrupt me there. I jumped the gun. So I'll just say that I'm in favor of your new definition. So that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ann and Michelle, for all of the hard work on this. I feel like we have been talking about this for at least a year, and I would be very happy to put this discussion to bed. And I think the definition and the direction we're going, weaving in so many of these different threads, I think you've done a really good job of that. So I want to, supreme appreciation for sort of pulling all this together over a number of months as we've continued to kind of talk about it and go back and forth on different things. And I think that this definition covers a lot of the things that we've discussed and been concerned about. One question that I had was on the transit, I guess the transit definition that refers to on the transit network. So I guess I'm talking about bus rapid transit improvements being classified as major infrastructure. I guess I'm trying to understand what that means in terms of what level of impact or infrastructure would be part of a quote unquote BRT type of network, because I think there's sort of the true BRT, and then there's some projects that were done, the pilot projects that were done by like Arlington and Everett and Cambridge and Watertown that are not exactly BRT, but they were sort of a BRT pilot. Can you just expand on that a little bit about, is there something more intentioned about, something that is sort of true BRT that would be classified as major infrastructure?
Well, I think at this point, it's more like extension of the Silver Line, that type of bus rapid transit. Like the other, dedicated bus lines is not necessarily, that's part of, the dedicated bus line piece is part of our Complete Streets program.
Okay, yeah.
So, and then like any like signal priority or whatever would not be included. It's really an extension of a, bus rapid transit network, which basically at this point is like expanding the Silver Line, or if there's new, networks of BRT in the region.
That makes a lot more sense to me. Thank you.
Kansas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Tom.
So first of all, you would mention that you were going to be discussing evaluation. I personally would have a better comfort level with things if I understood where the definition could fit in with evaluation. Because what I was asking myself as I was reading the memorandum was, well, okay, this stuff, it sounds like it's logical and makes sense, but given that right now we don't really evaluate major infrastructure other than putting a cap at it, what does all this mean, and how would it impact the work that we're doing now on the TIP evaluation and all these evaluations? So that's my big question. Does it make sense to talk about a definition without talking about evaluation? I'll give you one example. So I'm scratching my, so transit was never considered was never put into the category of major infrastructure, correct?
Well, no, we had the extension of the Green Line up to.
So are you talking about flex funds when we talk about major infrastructure with transit?
Yeah, flex funds that yeah.
Okay, then that would not present the challenge on what the relative percentage of major infrastructure projects would be for the transit category. That's what you're basically talking about is the discretionary funds for FHWA.
Well, we're talking about the MPO's major infrastructure program, which uses MPO target funds. Project
MPO target funds, right?
Yeah. So we did. So when we did in the case, we did flex funding to the Assembly Square, and we did, even though the project never went through, flexed it to phase 2 of the Green Line, but then that money went to phase 1.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. So I understand now where you're coming from with the transit. Can we just talk a bit, and I won't take too much time, about the evaluation, what your like insights are into that?
So we actually do evaluate projects in the LRTP.
Right.
And I think, and we mentioned that in the memo, and I forget, is it Appendix A or B or whatever? It shows the evaluations. And we basically, for projects, some projects, we just don't have the level of detail, in the outer time band. So they are evaluated based on how well they meet our goals.
Right, and I don't mean that. I just mean vis-a-vis the major infrastructure category. But I guess what you're saying is you said that should be to be determined by the MPO board policy or stuff like that. Well, look at Mr. Chair, thanks for letting me ask the questions. Between some of the other folks' questions and Ann's answers and the questions that I brought up, I appreciate it, and I've gotten some clarity on where I was a little confused. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Tom. Ken Miller?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. And Ann, thank you. And Michelle, thank you. I think this goes a long way to clarifying things. So very good. A couple of points. One, I think this inclusion of all other principal arterials, I'm not sure is appropriate because just the way they happen to be in the Boston region, some of them are not really limited access. And I think that, so if I would venture to say, if you could do a complete streets project on a facility, then I would say it should not be included in this definition. So I'm not sure all other principal arterials should be included. I think it should be more limited access. Secondly, something like the new Boston Street Bridge, I mean, it doesn't quite fit into a category, and I think that's okay. I don't think we should try to jam projects into categories. I mean, you're always going to have these, every once in a while, like a project that doesn't fit. And I don't think you have to create a separate category for them. You can just have, if you want to, you can call it other or miscellaneous or something like that. But I think it's certainly up to the discretion of the MPO to fund those kinds of things, and it's okay if it doesn't quite fit into a category. I think that's probably okay. And then finally, on evaluation criteria, I think something like, say you had a complete streets project that was over $50 million, I think you should probably still apply the complete streets criteria, even though it would be qualified as a major infrastructure project. Because again, and I think you should perhaps take another look. I don't recall off the top of my head the criteria for major infrastructure, but I think that I think that would make sense to, even if it's over 50 million, to apply the complete streets criteria, and then you could tailor the major infrastructure criteria more towards the limited access facility. So you're comparing apples and apples and oranges and oranges. Thank you.
I think we would do that. I think we would apply the criteria, but we would use, I think the 50 million is so that the MPO can, have a little more scrutiny to figure it out, and then, figure out how they want that to affect the funding goal, whether they want to include it in the funding goal for major infrastructure or for the complete streets program.
Right. So I think, thank you. So I think that, so for example, I would take another look, I don't recall off the top, at the major infrastructure criteria to tailor them more towards limited access, because by definition, you're not going to have certain things that you could get points for. And so they'd be at a disadvantage when you're comparing it. So I would maybe take a look at that to make sure now that you have the criteria are consistent with the definitions of the projects, provided you are pulling out complete streets for evaluation purposes and applying major infrastructure complete streets projects, you applying complete streets infrastructure to them. Right. Thank you.
Tim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Definitely appreciate all this great work by the staff and support, I think, sort of changing the cost thresholds for sure, and most of the definition, but just, I guess I have more of a question about, I think focusing it on kind of limited access highways and freeways, et cetera, makes sense, but just wondering, with kind of the removal of a project that isn't adding capacity. You're kind of fixing a network problem if we're not kind of opening the door to more kind of maintenance type projects.
So, well, I think we focus our target funding on, capital projects. But I think, like I said, with anything, if it fits into a category of one of our investment programs and the MPO wants to fund it, or even if it doesn't fit into a category, if the MPO, it's always at the discretion of the MPO to fund projects that they want to fund through with their target fund. So, but we mostly do capital projects though.
Right. So, but I mean, for example, you could have like a Sumner Tunnel rehab, which I support, as kind of utilizing this program, right? Or you could have, a $25 million, more of a maintenance type project, as opposed to a type of project that actually adds capacity or fixes an access issue, that type of thing, right?
Right. I guess that we would have to look at those at an individual basis, and like I said, it's at your discretion.
Yeah. No, I get it. I just kind of reading the kind of that last sentence in whatever point number 3. The definition can accommodate a variety of project types.
Right.
So I guess just answering my own question. Theoretically, if we supported it, we could have more of kind of like a stretch of 93 kind of maintenance type project or improved lighting project that could be funded with this program now, since it's that project, whereas before, since it's not adding capacity, wouldn't necessarily be something kind of viewed positively through this program, right? And that type of project would have, again, up to our discretion, but would have an opportunity to get funded through here, right?
Right.
Okay. And then just on Daniel's point about the BRT network. So I think it's just confirming that, a project like, I think folks know we've been like exploring Summer Street, Center Street bus lane. That wouldn't necessarily be a project type that would fall into the transit category of this.
Well, that's like, it's more dedicated bus lane, right?
Right.
And that's included in our Complete Streets program. If you remember, we boosted the funding goals in that program because we wanted to encourage dedicated bus lanes.
Right. It seems like it's adding some confusion by specifically saying the BRT network, because that has a broader definition than just the Silver Line. So do we even need to say BRT? It's like, wouldn't the Silver Line fall into a fixed guideway transit network anyway? Right.
Yeah, we could, we could do that if that's how you want to define it.
Samantha Silverberg.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ann and staff, for all the great work incorporating a ton of, I think, disparate feedback into something that it does make a lot of sense. On the transit definition, I agree with it. I think as it's conceived, I think it makes a lot of sense to consider new connections and extensions of our network the same way we're thinking about other major infrastructure for the roadway network. To this particular point about BRT, it could be helpful to take a look at how the FAST Act defines BRT for the purposes of FTA capital investment grant projects like new starts and small starts. Generally, it's bus rapid transit within a fixed guideway or a dedicated right-of-way. So if you think of dedicated right-of-way, that's the Silver Line, whereas some of the earlier references to things, pilots in Everett and elsewhere, and even Boston, are not, I would not call that a dedicated right-of-way if it's paint on a street that can be, can be crossed. So maybe dedicated right-of-way might help alleviate some of the concerns, and it would also, I think, be consistent with how FTA thinks about major BRT infrastructure projects versus other types of bus network amenities.
Thanks, Sam. Other questions? All right, Anna, I've got one. Can you go back to the slide that shows the definition? Just a couple slides back. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. There. So here's my question. Is a project that satisfies either one of these bullets a major infrastructure project? So to Ken's point, a project on a principal arterial other, is that a major infrastructure project?
Yes, it's one of the points. It hits one of the points or
Okay,
both.
but then I don't understand because table 4 says like in Lynn 107, which on the map is another, currently is a major infrastructure, but under this definition, the proposed investment program would be complete streets. But it's on it's on 107. It's on another, right? If you go to the map.
It's principal arterial other, but it's not fully or partially controlled.
So when you go to when you go to the map,
Oh, when you go to the map, okay.
right? You've got a map, the next one, I think maybe.
Right.
Nope, not that one. I think go back the other way, I guess. Right, you've got a map that shows 107. Maybe it's not in Lynn.
Yeah, I don't think it goes up to it.
Okay.
You know, it only shows a portion of 107.
All right. So any project on any of these clear or gray, orange, or red would automatically be a major infrastructure whether it costs 50 million or 5 million.
Right. So like 1A, like the Boardman Street, the whatever Bell Circle, all of those, even though they were in the universe, those projects would be considered major infrastructure. Even if they weren't $50 million.
Right. Anything on Route 16, anything
Right.
on Route 1 up until you get past 128. All right.
Right.
And then anything that's over 50, regardless of what roadway it's on, is an automatic major infrastructure, yes?
Right. Yes. To give the MPO the extra scrutiny to look at the projects and see if if it meets the goals and it's worth funding.
Okay. Daniel?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's what I was going to point out was I think the definition or the inclusion of the principal arterial other seems to be contingent upon it whether it has partial or complete control of access on it. So it's not any principal other arterial, but something that has partial control access. That's the intention, right, Anne?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Right. It's what's on red on this map.
Yes.
Or on the map, because you can't really see Boston when you go to the next map, what's on red in Boston's map.
Right.
All of
Okay,
Route
thank
9.
you.
All of Route 9 is a other. And all of those roads, the Hall Road, Memorial Drive.
Right.
Yep. Okay. Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that's my question. So is that map, so that was my question. Is that map then only representing the other principal arterials that have access, that are access controlled?
Yes.
So Memorial Drive, you would consider that having access control?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a question.
Yeah. I mean, when there are exits and entrances, exit ramps along Memorial Drive. Oh, wait a minute. I'm thinking Sterling Drive.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Stark Drive definitely, but Memorial Drive is just intersections. I mean, there are a couple of underpasses and stuff, but it's not really.
Right. Well, I mean, that's how it's classified.
I mean, there's parking on it, right?
It's classified as that in the federal, functional classification. We took this right from that. So, I mean, it's up to the MPO, their discretion. It's,
All right, so that's classified as another principal arterial or another principal arterial with limited or controlled access?
With controlled access. So that's all that the red shows principal arterial other that have fully or partially controlled access.
I see. Okay. Well. Okay, thank you.
So that would be a partial access, I would.
Okay.
Other questions? Seeing none, and you want to roll call, wait, Sheila Page.
Thank you. I have a quick question, and thank you for all this work, because I know this has been a big undertaking. The Lexington project, because it's going to probably hovers between both, although it's below the $50 million threshold now. But the bulk of the project is on a, well, I guess a collector street or a minor arterial. However, it might and likely affect the ramp for 95. And so I'm kind of wondering how we might split a situation like that, where really the project is not, it doesn't fit in these higher classifications, but there is a piece that does, and how we might split that.
Right, I personally would put that into a complete streets project, because the majority of that project, and it's probably just, I don't know what the design would be. It's probably just trying to, connect with the ramp.
Right.
So, I mean, and that's how how we put it in the table. So that project would no longer be in the major infrastructure. It would be a complete street. And I guess it all depends on what your design's going to be.
Right, which, yeah, well, yeah, that, and I guess that's the case for a fair amount of them, of the jump from the long-range transportation plan to the tip, because then we'll have the 25% design done. Okay, thank you.
So in that case, that project wouldn't have to be in the plan before it got put
that's
into
true.
the tip.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Although, yeah. Okay. This is great, though. I think this is better aligns with the new definition. I think better aligns with how we want to handle things generally. And you're right. There will always be these one-offs that will have the discretion. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, Ann, I've got one last question, and if it's verging over into the next item, just tell me, we'll cover it later. Is our intention that major infrastructure projects will be separately listed in the next plan, regardless of whether they add capacity?
It is. I mean, that's what we've always done. We've always included them in the plan, but it doesn't really go into the next discussion. But I guess that is a discussion point. We've always put them in, so I guess it's up to the MPO whether they want to continue to include them in the plan.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
No.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, no.
John Romano,
John Romano, no.
Samantha Silverberg,
Yes.
Laura Gilmore, Laura Gilmore,
Let's take that as a yes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that's a yes, but I'm not sure. I'll come back. MAPC, Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane, I will come back. Leonard Diggins.
So perhaps I missed the motion, but the motion is to whether we're going to approve the new definition, right?
You know what, Lynn? Did I take a motion or just take John and call the roll?
I think you just had him call the
I
roll.
think you just had me call the roll, Mr.
And then I heard
Chair.
some no's.
I thought I missed it too, but I
Yeah,
just.
No.
And I heard some no's that confused me, so I
Thank
just
you,
wanted to
Lynn.
make sure I was going to vote the correct way,
All right.
you know?
So,
All right.
all right, so let's go backwards. Sorry, Lynn. Thank
No
you so
problem.
much.
No problem.
So, Lynn, can you make a motion to approve the definition?
I'd love to make the motion to approve the definition.
Thank you. Is there a second? Is there a second? Eric Barras, can you second?
I second the motion.
Thank you. Now, does anybody who previously voted want to change their vote? Seeing none, without objection, Jonathan, record those votes as if they occurred after the motion. Now go on.
Okay.
So I will vote yes.
You'll vote yes. Just so I can go back, if Laura Gilmore could repeat her motion, I didn't catch whether that was a yes or no.
My apologies. I was dealing with a child. I apologize for
No
a
problem.
small amount of this. So I think at this point that I'm going to vote no.
No. Okay, thank you. Brian Kane,
I am a yes. Thank you.
you are a yes, thank you. Tom Kadzis,
Tom Katz is yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Yes.
David Kozis,
David Kosis, no.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Sheila Page,
Sheila Page, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Patrick Keyser,
Patrick Keyser votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
So that motion carries, right, Jonathan?
Yes, it's 12 yeses and 5 nos.
Thank you. So I believe that given the time, we have a choice of continuing with this or doing the tip criteria discussion. And staff would recommend that we push the rest of this discussion off to the next meeting and that we go to the next agenda item, which is the tip scoring. Is there any objections to that? Seeing none, thank you, and we'll see you next meeting for our
Great,
final
thank
discussion
you.
on this.
And
Thanks a lot.
just a reminder that everybody, that all the information that'll be presented is also included in the memo that's posted.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
All right, next up is the next agenda item, which is Matt Genova to talk about, I think, tip criteria. Is that right, Matt?
That is correct. I'm just unmuting Matt Genova and then getting the other PowerPoint up. Again, I apologize for the technical issues this morning, folks.
No worries. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay.
Sounded good.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I believe we are set to go. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, everyone. Today, I'll present the overall scoring framework for the proposed tip criteria. As you all know, we've spent the last several MPO meetings discussing the changes to each of the 6 MPO goal areas. Today, we'll zoom out a little bit to see how all of these pieces fit together into one unified whole. So here's the ground I'll cover during today's presentation. I'll start by highlighting our central goal for this discussion, as well as some questions that I hope to answer today. I'll then give you a brief reminder of how our current scoring system works. From there, I'll discuss the feedback received from several MPO members at our July 27th focus group before diving into the proposed new scoring framework. I'll briefly highlight some next steps at the end before we have a conversation on this proposal with whatever time remains. So there's really one central goal for today, which is for you all to provide your feedback on the proposed scoring framework that we're about to discuss. In doing that, I hope to get your responses to 3 key questions. 1, do you support transitioning to a new overall point total? 2, do you support increasing the value of transportation equity as a portion of the total score? And 3, do you support the idea of using different goal area weightings across different investment programs? All of these questions will come into focus as we move through the presentation. So I want to take a few minutes to remind you all of how our current scoring system works. As you all have seen previously, our current scoring system is on an overall scale of 134 points. Those points are broken down across the 6 goal areas as you see here. These make a little bit more sense when translated into percentages. Our highest scoring goal area is safety, followed very closely behind by system preservation and capacity management and mobility, all 3 of which are roughly 22% of the total possible points. From there, the other 3 goal areas are clustered between 9 and 13% of possible points, with equity occupying the 6th and lowest spot. We've talked quite a bit over the last several months about some of the elements of the current system that we're aiming to improve upon. Transitioning from a 134-point system to something a little more legible is certainly one goal, as is raising the relative emphasis on equity, which is something my colleague Betsy Harvey has discussed a strategy for in recent MPO meetings. So breaking out our current scale by project type, you can see here that the same weight is placed on each goal area across all investment programs. One of the themes that we've come back to several times throughout this process is that our current criteria, though uniform across investment programs, don't apply equally to all projects. For example, bicycle and pedestrian projects tend not to improve transit assets, and intersection projects tend not to rehabilitate many bridges. This leads many projects to receive scores of 0 in criteria that don't meaningfully apply to them. Additionally, we've yet to score or program any transit modernization projects. And so one of the key goals of this process is to define the criteria for that investment program as well. So I want to take a moment now to discuss some of the feedback we've heard from this body on the overall scoring system. First, when surveyed last winter, this board noted that equity is the most important goal to be achieved when funding transportation projects. The 11 respondents to that survey also ranked safety for people walking and biking among the top 5 goals, along with promoting economic development, prioritizing buses, and reducing emissions. This aligns closely with much of the public outreach we did last fall, as equity, bicycle and pedestrian safety, and improving transit were all deemed critical in those surveys and focus groups. So as I mentioned at the outset of this presentation, we also held a focus group with MPO members on July 27th to discuss preferences on the scoring system. We asked questions about the overall number of points and the relative weight of different goal areas and got some great feedback. I want to thank all 7 MPO members who attended that focus group, as your input was invaluable in shaping today's proposal. Though we covered a lot of ground in that conversation, several key themes emerged that I want to highlight now. We can certainly come back to these themes in today's discussion if board members who weren't able to attend the focus group would like to weigh in on them. The key takeaways from the focus group included that safety is the most important thing that a project can accomplish. System preservation is second in importance. That capacity management points should really be focused on non-single occupancy vehicle modes. That equity should be highlighted separately from base scoring. That point disparities between goal areas should be reduced where possible. That the overall scoring system should be one that is legible. And finally, there was no strong preference stated on different weights across investment programs for goal areas. So as MPO staff were crafting Oh, sorry. Apologies. So I'll dive in now into the proposed new scoring framework. This discussion will cover the overall scoring system, as well as the point allocations across investment programs and goal areas. I'll also run through a scoring example to show you how everything will work. So as MPO staff were crafting this proposal, the general approach taken was to try to accomplish three main things. First, staff incorporated MPO member feedback, emphasizing the importance of safety and system preservation, while reducing the disparities between the highest and lowest scoring goal areas for most investment programs. Second, staff endeavored to make the final overall score one that is easier to understand than our current 134-point system. And finally, staff aimed to increase the overall weight of equity and highlight these points in the overall scoring system. So the new scoring system is proposed to be on a 100-point scale, with the integrated equity approach accounting for 20 points or 20% of the total score. The remaining 5 goal areas would comprise the other 80 points, and this basic 80-20 breakdown in points would remain consistent across all 5 investment programs. So I'll walk through what things will look like when we distribute those 80 points across the other 5 goal areas. You'll notice that unlike our current system, the points distributed to each goal area vary across investment programs. This is most notable in the transit modernization program, in which system preservation and capacity management are weighted significantly more heavily than safety, the points for which are shown on the screen now. This is because we're likely to fund many projects that emphasize these areas, like transit station enhancements or new vehicle purchases, rather than projects that would have a meaningful impact on transit safety. So as we start to layer on the rest of the points, you'll also notice other variations, like how there are fewer system preservation points for bicycle and pedestrian projects than there are for roadway projects. This is because many of the projects we see through the bicycle and pedestrian program are creating new facilities, things like rail trails, rather than reconstructing existing biking and walking paths. These themes are present throughout, as the point values for the goal areas within each investment program are tailored to the projects we aim to fund through each. Here are the capacity management and mobility points, followed by the clean air and sustainable communities points, and then economic vitality. And finally, our 20 points for equity, which again is consistent across all project types. So here you can see how the new proposal compares side by side with the existing system, which is displayed on the right-hand side of the screen, with each goal area represented as a percentage of total points, to put it on the same scale as the new proposal. Again, the main changes here are to more heavily emphasize equity, while also drawing distinctions between the relative weights of safety, system preservation, and capacity management across project types, depending again on the things that those projects are most focused on accomplishing. To show how this new system plays out, we're going to run through an example scoring scenario for a fictitious intersection improvement project. To begin, you can see that intersection projects can score up to the listed point values in each goal area, summing to a total of 80 base points. So because of the multiplier approach that we've proposed for the equity scoring, the possible points for equity don't neatly add up to the 100-point scale that we're aiming for. This is a solvable problem, however, as the equity score can be scaled using a simple ratio in order to make the total equity score out of our desired 20 points. This puts us on track to have the final total score for each project out of 100 possible points. I'll walk you through the scaling process here in a few slides, so you understand how these points are arrived at. For now, let's say that our intersection improvement project scored the points shown here in each of the base criteria. 14 points out of 20 in safety, 12 out of 17 in system preservation, etc. Those points add up to a base score of 48 points out of 80, not bad. As you see here, however, our equity multiplier across all of the applicable base criteria has resulted in an unscaled equity score of 22 points out of a possible unscaled total of 38. To arrive at our final score, nothing changes in the base scoring, as these point values already line up with our desired total of 80 base points. But to bring our overall equity score in line with the other goal areas, we'll need to do some quick math to scale the score, the raw point score, down to 20 scaled points. So here we would take our unscaled equity point value, divide it by the unscaled possible equity points, and then multiply it by our desired equity total. Using our example from earlier, we would take the unscaled equity score of 22 points, divide it by the total possible unscaled equity points for intersection projects, which is 38, and then multiply it by our desired scaled total of 20. This results in a scaled equity score of 11.6 points. So back to our scoring example. Here again, we have a base score of 48 points. We then bring in our scaled equity score of 11.6 points. And then we add these two numbers together to arrive at our final overall score on our 100-point system of 59.6 points. Again, it's a little bit of math here, but nothing that's too cumbersome as a component of the overall scoring process. So what are some of the benefits of the proposed system? As noted earlier, this proposal results in a more legible and intuitive scoring system where point values can be easily translated into a percentage of total points. The new system also clearly weights equity more highly, a theme that again has emerged in staff conversations with both this board and with the public. When combined with the changes to in methodology that my colleague Betsy Harvey has proposed, we think that this system will result in a more accurate measurement of the benefits of projects for equity populations while better recognizing those benefits in a project's overall score. This work is always critical, of course, but especially so right now as the transportation field broadly grapples with its legacy of creating or perpetuating inequities for vulnerable and historically marginalized people. The proposal also retains the relative importance of safety and system preservation, again, a key theme that has emerged in past discussions with this body. And finally, by reducing the overall number of points, the proposed scoring system necessitates a more focused set of criteria, as there are fewer points to distribute broadly to a range of items with any given criterion. On the flip side, reducing the overall number of points doesn't allow for quite the same level of gradation within each criterion. For example, the scale for reducing carbon dioxide emissions is currently out of 5 points and is scaled with relatively small increments of emissions reductions to match that. So the scale goes from 100 tons to 250 tons, 500 tons of emissions reductions, etc. The new emission scale could be out of 3 points with the increments for any given point level broadened. So something like 250 tons, 750 tons, etc. On the one hand, this allows for slightly less differentiation in project scores within each criterion. On the other hand, this proposed system reduces the impact of uncertainties in the project evaluation process. So early on in the criteria revision process, we heard some feedback from this board that having narrow scoring bands for any given criterion communicates a level of precision in the measurement of something like air quality, when in reality, these impacts are hard to measure precisely at the early design stage in which we see most projects. So reducing the overall number of scoring bands or increments within any given criterion and broadening their ranges a little bit would help reduce this dynamic going forward and hopefully sort of get rid of some of that sense of false precision in the scoring process. Finally, as noted in the previous slides, this new system would require an extra calculation to arrive at a final equity score. While not overly complex, this does add a new element that's not in our current scoring system, meaning that staff would need to endeavor to communicate this clearly to project proponents and the public so that the scoring process remains transparent. I'll briefly talk about some next steps. So today's focus obviously is on the overall scoring framework that I've just presented. At the next MPO meeting on September 3rd, we'll discuss the first round of project test scores using the new criteria, pending feedback from you all today on any changes to this system. As we've discussed in past weeks, and as Tegan noted in her executive director's report today, MPO staff have also begun a second round of public outreach on the TIP criteria. We're in the home stretch of a survey in which we're asking folks if the changes we've proposed reflect their priorities for transportation in the region. The survey will close early next week on the 24th. We're also conducting a handful of focus groups with key stakeholders as well. The results of both the survey and the focus groups will be presented in September to this board. As we move into the latter part of September, we'll continue to discuss test scoring as needed, with the intention of arriving at a final draft of the new criteria around the start of the new federal fiscal year on October 1st. So with that, I'll return to our key discussion questions for the day, and I'm happy to take questions or comments with any remaining time that we have.
Glenn?
I know it sounds like I have like a cheerleading outfit on for CTPS, but I really like this, Matt. I really do. Now I will say, on the surface, it seems to be more legible because it's out of 100. But when you dig in underneath the surface, I think it's actually at least as complex as what we had, if not more so. But that's fine because these are complex. Transportation is complex. You can only simplify it so much. And do justice. To the nature of the topic matter. But I like what you've done, and I think one thing you've heard me say a lot. I think it might even be more important with the reduced range or reduced numbers points that we have to allocate. Is that we might need to make the way we bend things non-linear, so that we do give that rare extra point to a project that really scores very high for a given criterion. And so that's that. And also I think another thing we can consider with the reduced number of points that we have, we could always go to decimal if we need to. But I really like how you have incorporated a lot of the comments made from those of us on the board and from the survey. So thank you.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions? Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just chime in to say, yes, I think this is really good. Thank you, Matt, for all of your hard work on this and all the other staff members working on this. I like this. I think this is good. I don't think I have any questions. I think, you explained it very well with the equity multiplier and how, you sort of get one score at the beginning and then you need to scale it back or scale it to the 100-point scale. So it sort of brought me back to like school economics class or algebra class. But like I said, you explained that very well. So I don't think I have any other questions. I very much appreciate your work, and I think this is a good direction. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Kozis.
Okay, thank you. I like where we are as well. I'm also wondering if others might think that it might be useful to present the data in a way so that everybody could see the total scores first, not including the equity score, to give everybody a chance to just compare the projects against each other based on various factors, and then also to present the score including the equity multiplier. So something like, project A, we would see in a summary, project A has a score of, 50/70, and project B might have a score of 60/60, so that we could really understand, a little better what we're looking at.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, definitely something I want to prioritize in, sort of implementing this in the coming years to make sure that both the way we're approaching like the base scores and then also the equity multiplier is clear so that everyone knows sort of where all the points are coming from. So I appreciate you emphasizing that.
Okay, thank you.
Samantha?
Thank you, and thanks, Matt and team, for all the great work here. I agree with Len. We're all CTPS cheerleaders today. On the third question here, I just wanted to emphatically say yes. That's something that I know MassDOT and the MBTA does in our own evaluation of projects. You know, a budget is a reflection of priorities, and at the end of the day, you want a balanced portfolio. And to have a balanced portfolio, it means there's going to be different programs and projects that are higher on some things and lower on others. And if we were to apply a consistent approach or a kind of a single approach across all projects, we would wind up with an imbalance of certain things. And it's just the nature of a heterogeneous portfolio of assets and goals. So yes, definitely support the idea of using different weightings across different programs. And again, as you know, I think this might be something that will be iterative and we'll have to tweak over time as we learn what different scoring, you know, may or may not yield the types of results that we wanted at the inception. But I think this is great work. It's very thoughtful, it's detailed. And so, you know, thank you and thank you to the team.
Other MPO members before I call on members of the public who have their hand up? Laura Gilmore.
Hi there. I just wanted to say that on question number 1, I think transitioning to a 100-point scale in scoring makes a lot of sense. And I would hope that that makes it a little clearer from the outside looking in. I know I've always wondered about the 134 points and, you know, it just makes it a little complicated to understand the process. So I think it's a clear metric. It's something that's, you know, comparable to other systems. And so hopefully that will be helpful.
Thank you. Any other comments from MPO members? Seeing none, Rich Benevento, introduce yourself for the record, Rich.
Hi, Rich Benevento, World Tech Engineering, but certainly representing a number of cities and towns within the MPO region. First of all, thanks for the great agenda this morning. I enjoyed the MI discussion and certainly this. And also, thanks for the opportunity to comment. I know Matt had sent out a questionnaire for public comment on this topic, so and I responded, so I appreciate that. I have a question that is maybe a little bit further on down the road, so to speak, and that would be, there are a lot of projects that have already been scored under the current system that are programmed on the tip. And my question would be, if this new scoring system is implemented, is there a reevaluation of all those other projects that have already been scored? And I guess the concern would be for cities and towns that have already made a significant investment in advancing their projects through the design process, only to find out that under a new scoring system, they no longer have a higher score and they get bumped. So I guess, has there been any thought about that? I know, again, we're at the infancy of this new process, but has there been any discussion about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I appreciate you raising that. So for all projects that have already been programmed through the tip, we wouldn't go back and rescore those to shuffle anything around in terms of programming year or priority level. So everything that's already been programmed through 2025 at this point is set, and we don't anticipate changing that, except during tip programming this year if things need to be moved around for financial reasons or project status reasons. Obviously that can still happen, but on the scoring front, we don't anticipate taking a second look at any of those. For projects that we've scored but that have not yet been programmed, we would rescore those on the new system so that when making this coming year's programming decisions, we're comparing sort of apples to apples across projects that are being rescored. So projects that we looked at last year but that didn't actually get programmed, and then any new projects that come in this year. Yeah, so this would only be used for decisions going forward, but not to reevaluate past decisions.
Great, thank you. Great job, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rich.
Any other questions from members or the public? Seeing none, Matt, you want a motion to adopt this today?
I don't think we need a formal motion per se. I think the feedback is generally positive. So, from staff's perspective, I think we can keep moving forward with this if that works for you.
Works for me.
Save the vote.
All right. Assuming it works for everybody else, good job.
Thank you.
Yep. Next item on our agenda, I believe, is member items. Is that correct?
Correct.
Does anybody from any MPO members have any items they'd like to present to the board today? Seeing none. Matt Archer, when's our next meeting?
I do believe that it was my calendar is just refreshing right now.
September 3rd.
September 3rd.
Thank you, Roisin.
Thank you all. All right, so September 3rd, and we will have the follow-up to the major infrastructure discussion today on that agenda. Anything else from MPO members? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to adjourn? Please raise your hand, and when you get called on, state your name. Eric Barassa.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
There's Samantha Silverberg.
I second that motion.
Motion having been made and seconded, without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. See you on the 3rd.